Hello, everyone. Every time I do that, I think, oh, I'm supposed to have music, but then I don't. So sorry. I'm here today with Nick Floro, learning architect, CEO of Sealworks, person who you probably follow on Twitter because he posts brilliant gems at like 11:30 every night is like the sweet spot for Nick going through Feedly, I think, and sharing all the things he reads. So I asked Nick, it was, I think in one of the guild chats, we were
Mhm.
talking about how we want to see more case studies. I think you mentioned case studies. I was like, oh, I also want more case studies. And I do a thing to try to get more case studies into the world. Please do it. So we connected and you graciously agreed to come on and share a project that you worked on. Was this a couple of years ago that you initially worked on this?
Yeah, we started working with them back in 2015, and
Okay.
we basically every summer since then we have a major release. So it's been
Oh,
a,
okay.
a lot of fun to see them grow and see how people in classrooms get to use the platform to do their thing.
Yes. So this is a platform for teachers and schools to, and jump in when I start getting things wrong, to facilitate document-based questions for larger groups of students. So I was looking earlier to make sure I knew what document-based questions were because I thought, and I had flashbacks to AP European history. And I think that's really, for the most part, the only time I saw them, but they're such a valuable resource. And I've actually essentially created them since then because they're a really useful resource when you're trying to assess higher level thinking. You're trying to make sure that people can't just recite facts that you taught them, but look at a new text with new information and kind of merge that with what they've learned in whatever you're trying to teach them. So is that a solid base?
Exactly. Yes. It was traditionally used in AP, and the group behind this project, the DBQ team, they were social studies teachers, and they had a dream or a passion to help kids across the board. So rather than just limiting it to the honors students or the AP students, they wanted to give that opportunity to everyone because they believed that no matter what level you are, you can learn how to think and tell fake news and fake things, so that you're more intelligent. You're able to talk about things, to, like you said, critically think about it, analyze. And
Mhm.
the more I learn about it, the more I think about it. I'm like, this is so cool because it's what we do every day
Mhm.
in our field. But I have a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old, and I keep trying to plant the seeds into their brains because they don't get to use this tool because of the local school district. And there's some fun stories to tell about that. We'll wait till we get to that. Uh, so it's very cool. What was interesting about the project is that the DBQ team's been around for about 20 years now, and they sold binders to school districts and schools. And in the classroom, the product is loved because basically it helps teachers get familiar with these topics, and then they ask students to not just regurgitate, to actually think and analyze. And what we've seen over time is that they had originally thought about it for like high school students, and then over the last 20 years, they kind of opened it up, and they have like a elementary school product now, or a group of
Oh,
content.
mm,
And teachers get so excited, like once they fall into the process, they start as young as kindergarten now. So the ideal is that in kindergarten you're
mm,
not writing typically, but you're starting to analyze, like, do you like cats or do you like dogs? And the kids will debate,
mhm.
and it's the getting that fun talking back and forth, like, why isn't my cat better than your dog?
Yeah,
And yeah,
that's
so
really
a lot
cool.
of fun.
Yeah, just really like planting critical thinking skills. And it's a good way to transform how teachers think about multiple choice questions in the first place because it doesn't have to be based on a completely external something you talked about in the classroom. It can be in the moment. What do you think about this? Um,
Exactly.
Yeah. So the initial, so they were doing binders, they were giving binders to teachers. Where did you and Sealworks come into the game?
So one of their tech people, they're being teachers, they weren't very, we call them technophobic. They were afraid of technology. And what was happening was that teachers were scanning the binders and starting to use PDFs and digital, and they were all afraid of all the copyright challenges because they have to license from various groups because of the historic documents or pictures or videos and so on. And it opens up a can of worms. So they either were going to lose control to letting teachers do whatever they wanted to do, or they wanted to, look at how can we build something to, help change and offer this process to more kids.
Okay. So yeah, then the kind of logical next step that a lot of people would leap to would be protect the thing you're already doing. Do the thing that you're doing with the binders, make it PDFs, but protect the PDF so people can't share it.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what they were hearing elsewhere, right? But then you guys, so that's the performance issue. I always like to kind of set up, there's the performance issue of why they initially started, but then the external forces that force them to rethink what they were doing, which is interesting. So it's not, you're not coming in just to one performance issue. You're not coming in and saying, how do we improve equity around DBQs within schools, within school systems? But really, we have a good way to do that. How do we make it scalable and protect it and make it easier for teachers to use without us getting shut down for, wantonly distributing these things? Okay.
What was interesting is at that start, they were very strict. Like when we first started talking to them in the first year, where they were like, it has to be exactly the same. You can't defer. So they wanted the online product to look exactly like the print product, which we were like, are you sure? And we followed that model. And as we built a relationship and they saw the impact, today I'm allowed to start sneaking things in, which is a lot of fun and a dream, for all of us as instructional designers or learning architects to be able to say, let's try this, or I think this will really work. And it just opens up that, innovation that we can just see what happens.
So was the initial push to keep it the same because, the audience is teachers and teachers have more to do than figure out new technology all day long?
That was a definite concern.
Okay.
That they'd be able to do both.
Being careful with what I say.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure that they would be able to transition seamlessly, and that if they wanted to do one page, typically these are 10 to 20 pages roughly, and they typically take, in their perfect world, they would love kids to spend like a week to 2 weeks inside of it, but what happens is in different schools and different situations, they might only have a day, which means 5 hours, with over 5 days. But sometimes they'll do one part of it, and in the process, they would love you to go through it. And the ideal is that if kids start younger, they'll learn this critical thinking skills, so that as they get into 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they've seen results where they're writing at high school levels.
Wow.
And which is amazing. It's like, we're making a difference. Yeah.
So inside the tool, we'll talk a little bit about how it was shaped, but in the first part, when it was just binders, what was the students' kind of experience and process with it?
So they had a couple challenges. Typically, a teacher would get a binder, and the binder's black and white, just because of printing costs and everything. So kids would get photocopies of photocopies often. So when the teacher goes in the classroom, they're making 30 copies. And as a side story, my son got a copy of a copy of a copy, and he couldn't read it. And he's like, this is terrible. I don't understand. It's like 5th or 6th grade. And I was like, wait a minute, that's our DBQ. So I brought up the unit, and he's like, oh, it's color. Oh, I understand how the Romans did this, that, and the other thing. And it was so cool just to see his reaction of understanding that. I'm like, we reach out to the school and be like, hey, you guys don't own this. Like, do you want, we'll give you free access. I asked, and they're like, sure, you can give them access. But they didn't take us up on it. But it's just so funny to see like that. So that was one of the challenges too, is that they were, like any other industry, we copy or share, and they were losing control. So they thought, being digital would be everywhere, and I could take advantage of it in the classroom.
Yeah, it's really hard when you work with curriculum, because curriculum does take money to create. There are people behind it who own that curriculum, and it's hard because there's also information should be free. So you have to really work to balance that. I know I've worked a lot in associations, and it's a hard balance to say, like, look, we want people to have this information, but we also have to make it at some point.
Yes.
And maintain it. As Kara was saying, there are memes out there that students have made the teacher's copy versus the test or the copy they get to study from.
Right.
Yeah, I remember getting copies of the purple Xerox when back in the old Xerox days. We would get copies of that, so then it was just nothing by that point. So moving it online. So this is kind of a worksheet, and then moving it online, the student's experience shouldn't change too much in the plan.
Yeah, one of the opportunities that we had starting out was understanding how they taught, how to get teachers involved in the process and helping them to evolve into it. And we got to go into classrooms, and they have a lot of photographs, and they do a lot of documentation and videos around how successful classrooms and so on. But to see a classroom and to see the kids interacting, it's magical. It's my magic word. But it's so cool to see, because kids are talking, communicating, debating, and they're on the floor. They're drawing. They have a concept called buckets. So the idea was that when you read a document, you start to think about, what is the main point of this paragraph? What would you write about it? What are the facts? What are the things that you have questions about? And so you start to organize your ideals into these buckets. And the ideal is then you take those ideals and you pour them out of the bucket onto your paper. So you build an outline, and then you build your actual essay. And what we've been able to do over the last 4 years is build a digital version of that. So they have a concept called rainbow editing, and I'm like, what's that? Like, what does that mean? And basically, if you have a little one or a niece or nephew and they start drawing, if you imagine an essay, they start highlighting in yellow, green, red, like whether it's adjectives or phrases or words or sentences or ideas, and that's just pretty paper. It's like so cool looking. And so we wanted to recreate that idea in this digital space. They also had a concept called telestration, which if you remember in the Madden days, like when you're watching football or something, they would draw on the screen. And today I think of Explain Everything as an application that lets you do that, where you can just draw or annotate. And they wanted that power for teachers. So the two use cases were a teacher could be in front of the classroom with a monitor or a projector behind them, and the kids may not have any technology, so they might be working with print, and doing it manually. And when they have digital devices, like some schools are one-to-one, they are able to do all that digitally. And so the teacher can show what they're doing, or they can show, here's the ideal, and then let's see all you would do it. And sometimes kids work independently. And one of the magical things, though, is that they want them to connect and collaborate. And I'm like, this is just like real work. Like, we're supposed to be working together as a team. And I saw your session last week on design thinking, and it's like, yes, this is really good. It's like, it's so much better when we communicate together.
It's amazing.
So it's like seeing kids do it. I'm like, oh my God, you guys are like little grown-ups.
So you got to actually go into the classroom. You asked in the beginning. They said, we want it to look exactly like this, but online. And so then you guys said, okay, let's go into a classroom. Was there any pushback on the idea of you going into a classroom, bothering a teacher while they're doing their work?
No, they loved it. That was our real first connection with them. They're like, oh my God, you're actually listening and you want to come in. And we're like, yes, please. They're based out of Chicago, and the team is basically all former teachers that they pulled out of the classroom because they were in love with this ideal of DBQs. And they are probably one of the most amazing set of trainers, if you call them that, that help educate. And there's so much passion to help kids. Every
Mhm.
time I talk to them, I'm like, let's go, I'm ready. I'm like juiced up to 200% and like, let's do this now. So it's such a great environment to work in, where I know some of us have challenges,
Yeah.
day to day, like, oh my God, we got to do this project. Is it really ever going to launch? Or they're
Mhm.
not approving anything. So
Never. I don't know what you're talking about then.
yeah, the
So they
perfect
let
bubble.
you go. Was there any moment you were talking about how, you go in the classroom and you see that it's magic. Was there a specific thing that you realized in the classroom that changed how you were thinking about how you were kind of formulating your plan in your head? Um,
What's funny is we were brainstorming prior to this event, and we built. I went through the history capsule of like
mhm,
back to emails, and we used to use Keynote to do all the wireframing. And what's really cool is the original concept that we had proposed. I'm going to say it was about 80% right,
oh,
which
oh,
is usually not the case, but it just kind of clicked, and
mhm,
you can definitely see how it evolved. But some of the challenges were, can we allow a student to write on the screen without misrepresenting or moving data around? And the easiest way that
mhm.
we typically do that is a photograph or a PDF. And we've been big um, ambassadors to HTML5.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that we've been doing for the last several years. And one of the technologies in HTML5 is called the canvas layer, and that was kind of
Oh
the magic thing that we were able to utilize, where basically the content is a layer, and then your telestrations, your markup, is a secondary layer. And then we started adding
yeah.
more layers, and the trick is to give kids this power without giving them Photoshop or something crazy.
Right. So just
And
letting them draw, like they would annotate in Zoom or something like that,
ex-
where they can. Oh,
exactly, and one of the
okay.
initial schools that we had done a prototype, a test case with, the teacher was like, we're going to take 2 to 3 days and we're going to teach them how to use it. I'm like, okay. And within 5 minutes, the kids were like, we got this, let's go. And
Yeah.
that's where it kind of clicked. And I think the DBQ team saw the power, where, okay, the tool's not in the way. We're able to now, focus on content, and, we're able to transform into this digital space. And it,
Right.
it was neat
And
to
that
see each team member, like, it had to click by them playing with it and doing it and seeing it in the classroom to transform over, um,
that's super cool.
to be a
So I think
believer.
we should probably share the now that we've talked a little bit about the project, how it came to fruition. You have everything in Miro. So I'm going to throw that link in the chat, so people can play with that if that works. Um,
Yes.
and then if you also want to share your screen, and yeah, Eric,
Yeah.
kids pick up UX so quickly. It's
It's so true.
I let my daughter buy I just had her friend's Amazon wish list, and she's 3, open on my on my phone. And so I was going to order a birthday present, and my daughter clicked on, the thing she wanted, and without me guiding her at all, bought it. Just went through, clicked the yellow thing, clicked, okay, just clicked, and I was okay,
That's awesome.
good. That's a skill you shouldn't have, but I guess
Yeah.
it's a good UX test. Um, so yeah, I like how Kim described it as like markers on an overhead, because that's a thing that kids are used to doing, but it's just bringing it into a space that's a little bit more protected. Yes, it is a very, very dangerous skill. She can also get to the Amazon Prime app faster than she should be able to.
Gotta lock
So
it
I'm
down.
going to focus the screen on this one. There you go. So now this is big. We're small. I'm excited that I remembered how to do that. So this is Miro. Again, if you follow Nick on Twitter, you have heard of Miro. He is, I think, their biggest fan. And although there are a lot of others, but I know this is a tool that you guys really, really enjoy using, and with good reason. So yeah, if you want to walk us through a little bit about, how you shaped the project and how learning about the audience helped with that process.
Yeah, so just to kind of give you a heads up, with it, the link I shared, you guys have full access to move stuff, so be careful. You can also comment or ask questions, and you can draw on the screen. But if you guys want to play or look at, um, Miro is one of the tools that we fell in love with over the last several months because it allows us to collaborate, especially when we're all remote or forced to be remote. And what I kind of did over the last day or so is build out the last 3 or 4 years of going through the scrapbooks and looking at what we've done. So the DBQ Project is this team out of Chicago. They're really cool. They're the two owners are Phil and Chip, and one of the hurdles that I had to go through being the lead designer on the project is I had to demonstrate to Phil, who was in his 70s at the time, and he had to be able to use the program. And if that was good, the prototype, then we would go forward. And that made me really nervous because he's an amazing person and like a father figure, a coach, and a very inspirational speaker. But I was scared. I was like, oh my God, like, you know, he's gonna be able to do it. He uses computers for email, and now he's able to do all this stuff, which is really cool to see how, you know, anyone can get into the product or platform. But that was our first one of our first hurdles was like, can we get past him? You know, can he get it from a digital space? And he's been doing this for 20 years now in print form. So he's, you know, used to that format, that process, and loves that, you know, dialogue that kids are generating in the classroom. And they really wanted to make sure that that wasn't lost. So I just put in a quote that they share that their goal though is to help students think critically, improve reading and writing, which my mom was a teacher. I might have shared in the past, first grade. So I actually got to run that little digital copier that you were mentioning earlier. And so I think I give her credit for why I like to think about learning for doing that.
It helps. I think a lot of us actually, I've heard through the years, have a teacher parent. That's definitely a trend I've noticed. And I wanted to be a teacher, but I'm left-handed and can't write on an overhead. And that ended that career path. So that's why I'm in learning technology.
Oh, so funny.
So yeah, it seems like a really cool team. And I think there's a chance in this project that people might automatically think of the idea of digital natives, and whatever you make, kids will figure it out because kids can figure out computers so much faster than us. But obviously we all know that that's not true. And so I like that they started out with, you need to prove that this is usable, that this is easy to pick up, easy to use. No one's actually going to need 2 or 3 days to train students, which is, I love that idea.
Yeah, and you had mentioned like it's just fluid. Like the kids are able just to jump from here to there, and like, oh, okay, I get it. It works this way. I don't like it, you know, that it works that way. It could be better this way. So I think you mentioned like they're natural UX people. Like they just get it, and because it's around them all the time.
Yeah, and especially if you're looking at equity, then you are going to have students who that's not the case. They don't have, you know, a parent's cell phone that they can grab all day long and do stuff on. So knowing that they had that in mind is really, that's really interesting, and I'm glad to see that.
Yeah. So at the bottom of the define column, I threw in a video, which is just fun to watch because it's 8 kids talking about their DBQ project that they worked on. So some kids, especially in younger grades, might do one of these every 3 months. Other schools might do one a month. In the perfect world, the DBQ team would say do one a week, just so that you're going to master the process and understand critical thinking, and be able to do it more fluidly. But the average is 1 a quarter, I would say. So yeah, during a school year, you do 3, maybe 4, depending on if you're an AP or starting out. So what we've seen in the results is that the more exposure the kids have to it, they start to write and understand at higher levels, which is really cool.
Yeah, because the process is, again, kind of from their perspective, really analyzing a document, analyzing text, and then discussing it.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
So the this is a picture of one of their binders, which is black and white. And I mentioned that all the pictures are black and white, all the content's black and white. So in the binder, the left side is the teacher side. So that has all the cliff notes to help a teacher prep or remind them of the key things that they want to talk about. If that gets onto the web, which it has in the past, kids have the answers. So you have to watch out for that. The right-hand side is what the students see. So typically the teacher will pull out the right-hand side, and it's just interesting to think about, oh, they made it logical. So if I just pull out the right pages, or not the back side, when I photocopy it, then hopefully the kids only have their side. But they go through like an initial introduction, and then they have these documents, which is where they would start to annotate or do that rainbow editing on. And I think this was actually the one that my son had encountered, where it was 10 digital copies later. Couldn't read it, but you can see there's paths and what happens. And the idea was that kids are asked questions. So one of the fun things that we thought about, because they wanted to target young students to AP students, that not every classroom is the same and not every group of kids is the same. So one of the things that we built into the core of the system is total customization. So a teacher, based on a student's level, can say, just give them this page, give them this 3 pages, ask them these questions, don't ask them these questions. And then there's what they call scaffolding, so that if you're struggling with reading, you can turn audio on. So the system will read the audio to you in a voiceover. And in some cases, they have actors and actresses reading it. And it's very cool because it puts you into that mode of thinking, and you just kind of let it come over you. But then what'll happen is, if I hide the questions as an example, the teacher will ask, in the classroom, hey guys, what are some of the questions we would ask based on this screen that we're seeing? So the idea was that, just like in Miro, I'm like, oh, we were doing Miro before it was a thing. You would add a sticky note and you would start to write, this is an interesting map, which isn't very deep. But I would like, oh, Rome was X or Y. And I'm not a historian, so I can't tell you too much about it. But the idea was to get kids to talk about it and think about what they're seeing, what does it mean, and is it a pro or con, so that they could debate or talk about that particular item.
Right. There's so many parallels just between, not just how this is developed, but the idea, the process of a DBQ, and how we really try to develop learning for adults. I feel like Michael Allen would love this process, because it really is giving you just as much information as you need to construct your own knowledge and figure out what's going on.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So what's fun is, when we were trying to understand it, being tech people, the process was pretty easy for us to hear and to learn about, but we always had questions, and they were great about going back and forth. And to this day, we're chatting twice a week about things and planning and so on. But their process involved what they called the hook. So the idea was that we want to hook you into this content. So they have a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs that a teacher could tell the story, or the kids would read, and it would pull them in. So like, why are you here? What does this mean? What do you need to think about? So whether it's about slavery or World War I, whatever the topic might be. But what's really interesting is that they have 20,000 pages of content and a couple hundred units of information, but teachers will learn the process, and then they'll use what's happening in the world today. So is COVID good or bad? Or was it created in a lab, or is it nature? Is the new iPhone going to be good or bad? Whatever the topic is, but they'll use that same process then to help kids, form a argument, and you have to defend it then, which is a lot of fun.
That is very cool. Oh, and is that the rainbow?
Yeah, so this is kids, and we're like, oh my God, like, how are we going to do this? But like, kids on the floor drawing, and that's the bucket, the shape there, and the kids are writing in the bucket their thoughts. So there's 4 or 5 kids, teachers that are on the left, and they're working together, talking about it, and they're formulating that, and then seeing different shots, and it's so much alive, which
Yeah.
Being in the e-learning world, it's like click, 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 take the assessment. Hopefully we're not doing that anymore. But seeing this environment, I'm like, oh my God, I'm in love. Let's go. So I'm like, I need to work on this project.
This is very cool.
So our job was to, figure out how to take that magic and translate it online without getting in the way, which is a common goal I think we all try to live by, and I want to make a T-shirt that way. But it's a great UX. So like growing up, there was a technology called Kai Power Tools, which was one of the big plugins in Photoshop in the late 90s. But 80% of the screen was the UX, and 20% was your actual work area. And I'm like, this is awful. Like, I'm never going to do anything like this because like I have this little, mini area to work in. And so one of the measures that we use when we're designing is if, it's intuitive and it's, the students, whether it's adults or young people, are able to focus on the content, then we succeed at it. And that's what I love. That's what we should all be doing.
Right. It can't just all be the markers and, a bucket and so window highlighting. I really like that.
Yeah, so this is the ideal, just to make it easy for everyone to understand, but it's basically color coding. So this was the first technical test that we did, and it's so funny that I still have these files. But the idea that you could draw an arrow, you can draw with your mouse. If you have a pencil, you could use your pencil. But that was really cool. The pencil tool, the telestrations, we didn't introduce to year 2 because we were cautious, afraid, I would say, to make sure that it wasn't overwhelming, and we weren't sure how to allow a student to draw and to annotate at the same time. So in order to be safe and gather feedback and kind of build off of that, the initial release allowed you to use stickies, and your highlight tool was a box, a rectangle. So some of the feedback that we got is like, you can only draw a box, a square, and then you would make it translucent, and then you would you would put it over a paragraph. So the ideal is that when I'm moving that, if I wanted to highlight the first sentence and the second sentence, I would have to duplicate the box. So it wasn't the perfect thing, because if you used a PDF or Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you can just go like this. And so that was something that we had to push for in version 2, year 2, to make better, make easier. So like just going whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. That's my sound effect for highlighting. You're able to do it.
That's something where if you don't fix it, then you have a chance that a teacher will figure out, oh, just screenshot it, put a picture of it in, this other tool that they use, and they can just Google draw over it. And so you're really gonna ruin the basis of the project if people start to try to work around you because you're, like you said, in the way.
Yeah, and that was one of my dreams, which I think we've done a good job on, is how can we build this tool that allows you to do all these things and not force you to juggle 10 tools. So we're able to give them the power. So like most students write in Google Docs or Office, depending on the school, district, and the state. But we also have a writing tool inside of the platform, and schools that can't afford to license or don't want to work with Google because of privacy or whatever potential issues or challenges, they're able to do it here. But then we're also integrated with those other tools so that if I choose to use Snagit or whatever it might be, I can move things back and forth.
Okay. Yeah. So it really, and as a third party thing, it really has to be open. I think we don't talk a lot about the challenges of developing instruction or developing tools outside of your own organization. But that's something that you have to think of so many use cases. And here there are, a lot of use cases.
Yeah. So what, side note, like with the COVID situation we're in now, the kids have been homeschooling or working, schooling from home for the last 3 months. And they, ask this question, ask that question, and it's constant dialogue, but I have them trained now, little helpers, to screen grab what they're doing, because I found it so interesting, the hoops that they had to jump through. like to fill out a form. So like one teacher would send a scan, a photo, a picture that they took on their camera, and emailed them a picture. And so the kids would have to draw a box to write their answer in. Another teacher would have them, write what they saw in the picture and put it into a Google Doc, and someone else would have them draw. And it was just so interesting to see they're juggling several tools, and they're not focusing on learning then. They're focusing on, how do I draw this in this tool versus that tool? And I hate this tool, or I love this tool. I want to do it over there. Yeah. And it's like, it's what we want. We don't want. We want that perfect thing. And I think in the corporate world, we fight the same thing because we have all these assets, all these tools, all these things. And how do we build those bridges?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it seems like going into the classroom helped you see how people use it, the different ways in which people are going to use it, whether they're one-to-one or it's just a teacher at the computer kind of being directed by the students, or them doing it one by one.
So some of the pages are sideways. We found out in our discovery, and when they're debriefing us, because they've been working with this stuff for 15 years, they're like, oh no, it's all the same. So as we dove in, we're like, no, it's not the same. Like, what is this? This is a form that is sideways, or it's wide versus tall, and translating that to digital, or taking a wide landscape version and making it fit onto an iPad that's one mode versus the other. It's just interesting to have to figure it all out. And in version 1, we had to make choices, like, we're going to skip this page. They're going to do this by print if they want to do it, because it would take a third of the budget to build out something that could be flexible, that we weren't sure whether or not it was going to be used. So there were lots of decisions, and they were really great about also listening to tech feedback and design feedback, and working as a team to figure out how do we get to that next stage, and traveling with them to test and look at and gather, which isn't an opportunity a lot of us get often, and I think it's growing now, which I love. That really helps us do our job better, which are like, this is a practical case that you guys can show. They're like, look what happens when you guys let us do what we need to do.
Right. Let us know what the feedback is, what people are experiencing. And that, especially as consultants, it's really hard to get that opportunity, because you can't go back to clients and say, hey, give us all of your metrics. Yes. We want to see all of your numbers.
What metrics, right? now? They're like, we don't have anything.
So that's very, Wolf, go ahead.
At the bottom here, there are notes. So as we were looking at all the pages, we started to analyze, and they had 2 different types of DBQs. They had 2 flavors, like the EV, which had like extra data, and the AP version, which was called the SV. Enhanced version versus like the enhancements aren't there. And then they had 2 different names. And then as they developed more binders over the last couple of years, they went to 3 different types. So there was different logic that we had to work in to figure out, is it EV versus SV? Is it AP versus something else? I don't even remember them now, because they keep changing. But the more advanced units, what they've been doing is, with the elementary, they have to provide more scaffolding so that kids can learn how to do it, and transition or grow into these more advanced formats. So whether it's adding audio, whether it's giving them the ability to coach them or pull them through the process. And then what's cool, my favorite thing is with the essay builder, is that as they go through each step, like creating their stickies, creating a sentence, filling out this form, the form turns into a paragraph, the paragraph turns into an essay. And it's just interesting to see, like, my older son is in high school, and he didn't learn this way. So like comparing the way he learned, I think there's some challenges with, oh my God, there's a blank page. I have to write 20 sentences, 200 sentences, whatever the assignment is. And by learning this process, which I remember learning bits and pieces of in school, and we learned in college, I'm like, oh, this is just a cooler way to connect those dots and understand, just like we would Photoshop to silhouette something or something. Yeah.
Right. I was just thinking yesterday, I wrote an outline for something and thought, all the time teachers spent telling us to write outlines to make things easier. It really does. And I never do it.
Yeah.
And as soon as I did that,
I don't need
this
to
is
do that. I can save
amazing.
time. Yeah.
I'm making most of this now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, this is the data to show that it actually works. And like, if they told us that or started with that, like, you think it's going to take you 10 extra minutes and you're actually going to save 2 hours in the long run if you do it. You're like, I get it.
Yeah.
Um,
All the
so
stress is just gone.
yeah. So turning back to 2015, this was the original concept that we threw back at them
Oh.
with the initial data. And this was built in Keynote, which is like PowerPoint,
Mhm.
which was the main tool that we used for wireframing before we had all these great tools like XD and Proteo and so on. But it's basically taking their content. So one of the interesting things, this is a background essay, and it had 2 columns. And the ideal of reading 2 columns or multiple columns, you see that in paper or print because your eye can scan and you can control the piece of paper moving it up or down. But on screen, like except for CNN or other news-based sites, you don't typically see data presented this way unless it's like the main content and a side area. So this was one of the things that we weren't allowed to touch. And by making that
Yeah.
decision, it's locked us into some things now. And now we're like, on a phone, this is terrible because I have to move left to right. But if we built it in a way, if we had the time and the budget back then, it would be responsive where that second column would automatically flow under the first and can be
Right.
dynamic in the way it moves. So that's one of the things that we're we get a point for. We told you. We keep track of like who's right, who's wrong.
The big board on the wall.
Yes.
That the green screen's covering.
The digital. That's the other mirror board that I'm not going to share because I'm losing. No. So it's just cool to say.
I was actually going to ask. So all of their documents were in black and white. So when it converted to online, they were still in black and white, or were you able to get the color ones?
Yeah, what was cool is that they were using Quark Express, and I think it was Quark. And then they now go to InDesign because Quark isn't as popular. So we had to write a tool that converted Quark or InDesign into to translate those 20,000 pages into an HTML format. And then we had team members that went in and tweaked those files because they couldn't do a perfect job. I'm going to say it did about 80%. So we knew that this photo would have to be tweaked on all 20,000 pages because it didn't embed it right or it didn't add the tagging or something to that effect. But what's funny, you guys can make fun of me. If you zoom in, you can read my, I'm an engineer by schooling. So you can read my sentence and you'd be like, that's not a proper sentence, Nick. So I learned a lot going through DBQ too, but this is the actual proposed screen that we shared with them to explain the vision of how the tool could work. And it was based on other things that we had built, but it's fun to look at. And the ideal is that this is our main navigation, our left right things, which were kind of big, but we wanted to make sure that kids with their fingers could touch it on a tablet or a touch-based device. Most schools in the last 5 years, I'm going to say about 70% are Chromebook based. So those are smaller, less powerful typically because they're $200-300. The nice ones are up to $1,000, and you're like, why wouldn't you just buy a computer then? But so it's different ways of interacting. So all the tools had to be designed in a way that I could use the old-fashioned mouse, a touchpad, or a touch screen, which was just interesting to see. And in some of the feedback, like it's not working. Like, what's not working? Like you get into those things. Like getting the data out of the kids or the teacher or the classroom. It's a fun process. So we perfected that. If anyone needs to work with kids, happy to share.
Yes,
You've got a built-in case study, right? For 4-year-old.
And I like that you. So I think a lot of us who don't have engineering backgrounds get very nervous about the prospect of things like we created a plugin to convert everything from Quark to HTML5, but it's really important to think about how much money that actually saves when you're converting 20,000 pages of a document. So having, access to people or knowing who can help you with those kinds of things is really, really valuable. I turned to someone, a couple months ago who knows JavaScript. I don't know JavaScript very well, and I was having trouble with it. And I thought, oh yeah, I work with someone who knows JavaScript. So I just sent it over to her. She fixed it for me, and it was great. And it's, I think we spend a lot of time trying to think of what we can do on our own. But that kind of technique is so helpful when you're working with so much data.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too to see how the DBQ team has grown. So like when we first started out in 2015, if they were using a mouse, I'd be like, let me have that mouse. Like, let me do it. You're too slow. And today they are so amazing. Like they're whizzing around these product and moving things around, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm learning from you. Which like I would like, there's no way. Like you're too far behind. Like you're not going to catch up. But it's just by doing it, you get exposed and learn, and that's how I learned too. So it's an amazing point. Yeah.
Awesome. So that was the first prototype. Show us how it ended up.
So sketching, just to show you some of the process, like using photographs for the binders. So like they want to make that connection, and then like, hey, we don't have to use the binders. We can start to play with colors and tiles, and then we ended up blending it together. So we used a color from the print, but the making it more friendly to desktop or tablet or Chromebooks and so on. What was fun from a technology standpoint is like the goal was, because we were using HTML5 as the core technology, the back end was Python. Django is the framework, which is a programming language. So that's how we have students log in. We have to connect through what they call SIS systems, like student information systems. And so there's all kinds of integrations that we had to do in year 2 and so on. But what was cool is that as we look at Google Analytics to see how kids are using the platform, the goal was tablet or laptop, which are mostly Chromebooks. Teachers might have a desktop, but there was data like kids were using Xboxes, and we're like, wait, what? And there was a site where they only had Xboxes because the kids were either runaways or had some different issues, and they were in a situation where they were schooling within this area, and the technology they used were Xboxes. So the earlier version back in 2016-17 had an Edge browser, or not Edge, but IE browser. We're like, not IE, Internet Explorer, but it actually worked because it was built in HTML5. They couldn't do everything, but they were able to, the tool was functional, and we're like, it wasn't designed for that. We didn't really want that to work, but it was cool because it was an open standard. It just happened.
Right.
But we're like, why are people using Xboxes?
And that's so you can go into classrooms in the beginning and look at what people are doing, but to get edge cases, to find out about that one edge condition where someone is, relying on Xboxes, you have to have that big data. So that's a good, like, merging together those two sources to say, this is what we can see, but you comb through all the data to find that outlier. That's
exactly. Even with most businesses, even today, like we're like, we want a mobile thing, and we're like, are your users using mobile things? And like, we all use mobile things all the time, every day, but not for work, or some because we're doing stuff to create and so on. But the average worker is like, I don't want to use my personal device for work because it's mine. I don't want you loading things on it. So with the Xbox, just to make the point that you have to look at the data, because like we would never optimize for the Xbox because it's maybe 10 users out of 1,000 in a day or in a year. So like they want to invest to do that. So I think you have to make decisions based on that data to say, we can do this. It's going to take us a month or whatever and cost X. Is it worth it? It'd probably be cheaper to buy them Chromebooks, for that small audience. But just to think about it, it's like,
yeah, that's really funny.
Yeah, I'm gonna make from a design perspective, some of the fun stuff that happened. So one of my great design decisions, it's kind of fun to look back, is that the sticky notes were like, we're gonna put on an angle. So they were either turned 15 degrees to the right or the left, I think based on the color or the part of the screen that they were on. And there was no logic to it. It's just like, it'd be cool. We're branding it. It's unique. No one else ever did it. It's no big deal technically. But I just thought it was kind of neat. So when you clicked on it, it would turn back to not 15 degrees, and you were able to read, write, and type into it, and so on. But this lasted 2 years, and it got replaced by a straight version, which had tape. Another brilliant idea. So the sticky note looked like it was stuck to your screen, and we just thought it was cute. Yeah.
In 2 years,
we want to make sure it doesn't move. So it was like, this is fun. But again, no technical reason for it, no logic to it, other than it's a fun design thing. And this also, now we're just clean. We're just a normal sticky note. I don't know if we're allowed to call it a sticky note because of trademarks. A sticky thing.
I try to only call it a sticky note.
Okay.
You can't call it a POST.
Right. That's it. That's the magic word. But
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, just like in anything, people are passionate about that yellow is the wrong yellow. It needs to be more mustardy. It needs to be more yellowy. We're like, why? What? Like, one of the things that was also a disconnect is that when teachers project in front of the classroom, the colors were very brilliant, bright, rainbowy, and they didn't project well. And we're like, what are you talking about? So until I actually saw it, I'm like, take a picture. Like, we all have these digital things. Take a picture of it and send it to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. It's just not something we thought of, that when they reject it, unless you had dark mode, you couldn't see the projections, because some schools have projectors that might be 10 years old. And we're like, this is embarrassing. Like, we built something that doesn't work. And so that was an update we had to do in the school year to tweak the colors. So that was a push that went where magically the red turned a little bit more contrasty to allow teachers to be able to make it easier for them to project with.
So did you have to mute the colors in order to?
They actually were too weak. So they would look really thin or not readable. So this yellow would not be readable on that 5-year-old projector because the luminance isn't bright enough.
Yeah.
And
now, even if you'd gotten projectors to test it on, you probably wouldn't have gone to eBay and got an old projector to test it on. So
yes.
One of those things you learn in the field.
Exactly. And so one of the things that we do with their monthly, quarterly meetings is we ask them, and they're like, why are you asking us for reporting? So we what did you do in the classroom? What did you learn? Or what did you encounter? Or how are kids doing this? Or what did you see the teachers, are they struggling? Are they adopting well? But the more data that we get, just listening to their stories, we're able to tweak, improve, and make the magic, which is fun.
Huh. I like that as an example of something that had to be iterated, that did not work as well the first time. But it's often those stories that people tell where they've just been working around something that you see as an error that they just see as part of how it works. And it's not until they say it that you're like, I can fix that.
Exactly. Kids will just kind of oh, okay, I have to click 3 times to do this. I hate it, but I'm going to do it because I can get done or get to the next thing or get my little sticker.
Right.
And I didn't grab this, but that reminds me, in the new version that's shipping July 1st, I think, in a couple weeks, we introduced stickers. So when teachers are giving feedback, they're the cutest things, and I'll tweet this later today. But it looks like it's for a 4-year-old, 6-year-old. And I'm like, wow, if I'm in high school, am I going to want a little cute sunshine saying good job or great job? So we had to think about, I'm a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old, some people might like it. I would like it being geeky like that, but because it's designy. But some kids would be like, ooh, I want, whatever, different, flavors of what they like. We're like, so it was interesting to hear. And so now we have just words that we had to kind of fly into the release. And the next version would be that you can make your own. Teachers can kind of define their own, but it was that's too much to do without, are they actually going to use it or not? So, breaking things up into smaller plan or a sprint or roadmap, and helping educate your stakeholders about, we could do it all now, but it's going to cost 10 weeks of time and thousands of dollars, or we can do it in little steps and listen and gather feedback and see what resonates.
That's really cool. Yeah, that kind of management. I think that's a big thing of why I like talking to people about case studies is because you can sit and talk about all the things that would be great in a project, but a lot of project management is making those decisions and making those substitutions and just saying flat out that it's not a thing we can do. It would be perfect, but
Yes.
we can't. So as soon as reality hits, you get a lot more decisions. So they have this summit every year, except for this year, right?
Yes, exactly. And this has been the magic treasure chest because they invite about 100, 125 teachers and administrators every year to Chicago. And it's an opportunity. We get to go and talk about what's coming up, but we also run feedback loops where we get to listen to this school just adopted it. They have 10 teachers using it. This group out of Atlanta has 50 teachers using it, but they also share what they're doing in the classroom and things that aren't connected to the platform. So it's a great way to hear like the cat versus dog story. So they're starting with kindergarten kids, or they do stories around Martin Luther King, like all these crazy, not crazy, but very big topics that you're like, oh my God, my kindergarten 5-year-old is going to be doing this. Like, can they do it? Can they deal with it? And they just start to break it down into little chunks. I'm going to call it micro lessons. They call it micro cubes is the word that they use.
I like that.
And yeah, the idea was that they, have a little piece, and then in first grade they might learn a little bit more. But to see like these teachers come in with the stories and slides and showing how their kids are doing it, and it again just juices us up, and we're like, we're ready. Let's go. We're ready to like get version 5 out, next week, because it's so exciting. So it's like that. Round and round we go because we get juiced up and excited and like, here's 10 ideas. So we also present, here's 10 concepts we're working on. And so one of the ones I did as a joke was that we're going to come up with the DBQ Magic 8-ball, which is a trademark. We can't do it. But is this a good idea? So kids could shake their mobile device or their mouse, and it would say, yeah, it's not a good fact to use. But it, just to kind of see what would resonate, what doesn't. So other things that we played with is teachers like to help get a point across. So I live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is right where George Washington crossed over the Delaware River. So I'm like, this is where I am. So it's kind of cool. But one of the things that it's hard for us to understand is that George had thousands of soldiers with him, no food, no shelter. It's the middle of winter, and people were dying every day. So like these people were defending the North and so on. But in order for kids to understand that they had 10 people in a tent, and that tent maybe will hold 2 people practically. So what they do is they tape on the floor a 10 by 10 area, and they have kids lie down. The idea was just so they can understand that, oh, wow, I can only fit 3 people into this 10 by 10 area. So they make the connection. So what we were looking for was ways to visualize that. So we were starting to play with AR and VR. And so one of the really cool things that you can do today is with Maya, the 3D program, there is a plugin that allows you to take a 2-dimensional map and generate a 3D map based on the colors. Or the data from Google Maps. So this is I'm not going to say it right, the Appalachian Trail. But like, yes, to help, show kids that, oh, wow, this is actually really big, and that little person is here. So like, we play with ideas like we can do this in Minecraft, we can do it this way or that way, but it's fun to hear how teachers do different things and tape the floor. Like, I never would have thought of that. Like, that's such a cool idea, practical. I've got tape, I'm gonna kids lie down and see, like, you can only have 2 people in here, like how many kids can fit? But it's so much more logical, and they see it, they hear it, they hear complaining like, you're too close to me, move over. So imagine 10 people in a tent, you're like, oh my God, like they were fearing for their lives. To see that connection.
Yeah, so Eric just said history is so much more when kids can experience things. And this is so interesting because it's almost like you're kind of crossing the line into like experience-based questions where it's not necessarily just based on a document, but you're going to create an experience for kids I had a teacher who set up basically a sweatshop in the classroom. He had us fold little bits of paper and begged us not to tell the principal. And the kids who said, we're not going to do this anymore and got other kids to stop doing it, won the lesson because they started a union. And that was the point of the lesson, was about unionization. And I think about that all the time when I think about learning experiences. But really getting people to feel what they're doing. That's very cool. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour already. This crazy. Was fascinating.
I'm gonna invite anyone who wants to go into the Miro board and add a question or chat it or tweet it or whatever. I'm happy to talk about it. We've learned so much, and one of the big projects that we're working on for next year, like this release isn't out yet, we're talking about next year, is because we've built out all these little components or these tools, is that we're going to look at the big picture. So we'll come back next year. And we're going to do a redesign to kind of bring everything back together, because we built the course builder 3 years ago and it's been upgraded the last 2 years. We built the sticky notes. You saw the tilted one, the taped one, and the newer version. But like, one of the lessons that we've learned from a software development standpoint is that you have to add time and educate your stakeholders or your internal teams that you don't just launch this and it's done. You have to keep touching and tweaking and updating. And that's a hard shift. Like, we all understand that because of what we do every day, but our teammates don't or may not. So if you're not being an ambassador to that, make sure you do that to help them understand and pull them into the right direction.
Yes, but this isn't done. This is a good starting point.
Yes.
Yes.
And we can make it better and better.
Well, that is awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. It's a really, really good example of, something that could have just been locked PDFs distributed the same way, that I think takes advantage of the new platform. It takes advantage of it being online and looks at it as creating a new experience that way. So I really appreciate you sharing it and being, open with your challenges and successes throughout.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So tweet at Nick, go to the Miro. Thank you guys. It was great to see everyone. And I will talk to you, I'm sure, in a bit, Nick.
Bye. Thanks.
We'll see ya. Bye.